For geometry today, you have a two-part assignment. The first part is in the note packet. We're going to do our notes on pages 8 to 13. That's the rhombus and rectangle and square. Along with this video, your note packet, and then the substitute teacher should have an assignment for you that'll match up the same kinds of problems just for some extra practice. So step one is take out your note packet, go to page 8 where it says rhombus on the top. And then in your email, there's a link for the app on Quadrilaterals. You click on that and pull this screen up as well. And I'll walk you through the steps on the note. Okay, so part one is on page 8 in the note packet. You find the page on the notes for a rhombus. You may have this done in class. You can skip ahead if you've got this page filled out in the next page as well. But for a rhombus, you need to start with the definition. You can simply use Google to find a definition. Just type in define rhombus. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could define it, but essentially it's going to say something about four sides being congruent. You're supposed to have all four sides the same, which, by the way, should help you to answer problem number 2 as well. Next, you're going to go to the app. Oh, hey, that popped up. Next, you're going to go to the app. And it's asking you, what are the 4 types of quadrilaterals that are listed? When we start here, it started off as a square, but there are the 4 different types of parallelograms. So that's your answer for problem number 3. It says to make a rhombus that's not a square. If you need help doing that, you can kind of mimic what I'm doing here. But a rhombus is what you learned about in kindergarten or so as a diamond. This is a rhombus. So you want to pull up a rhombus here. I'm not sure if the screen quality will be good enough for you to read all the measurements from the side. For problem number 4 on page 8, it says take point D and bring it to -2, 2. Point C, bring it over to 1, 4. I'm already at that spot. And asking you, where do you got to put point B to make it into an even diamond? Basically, you're looking for symmetry here. I'm going to leave that for you to find and decide where that point has to be and put that in for your answer for number 4. And then it says call your teacher over to check it. Obviously, I can't check it, but if you have it right, it'll say parallelogram and rhombus over here on the right-hand side. After that, problem number 5 asks you to identify the rules for rhombus that carry over from parallelogram. You should have that on the previous page in your note packet. We have 5 rules for parallelogram. All 5 rules are still true for a rhombus. However, with a rhombus, there's a couple of extra rules. One of them, I'll go back to having a rhombus. This one will be different from the one you have on your paper. But for one of the rules is that all 4 sides end up to be congruent to each other, they're equal, and that the diagonals, if you look right here in the middle, or if you went over here and looked at the measures down here, the diagonals make 90-degree angles with each other. So the rhombus problems should be pretty easy. Here we got an angle here. That's an angle where the 2 diagonals meet. We should know you should have just written down what happens when the diagonals meet. They make a certain angle. That's all you have to do. There's no work in that problem. Just identify what that angle has to measure. For problem 2, the rule is we know that all 4 sides in a rhombus have to be the same. So if this side's 10, you should easily be able to figure out these other 3 sides. Number 3 here might be the trickiest, but it's still not very hard. We know that all 4 sides are supposed to be the same. So this side and this side have to be the same. When they're the same, in math, we say they are equal. So you'd simply write an equation that says this side equals the other side, and then you're going to solve for y. And that's it for a Next on page 10, we have the notes for a rectangle. Once again, you can simply use Google to define a rectangle. There's one defining feature of it, and it's that all the angles end up being 90 degrees. So your definition is going to have to include that. And after you write your definition, problem number 2 basically asks you to identify what the most important part of the rectangle is. So if you go back to the app, it says to hit refresh and start it over. What you want to do is take this thing and make it into a rectangle, but we don't want it to be a rhombus or a square. So you're going to have to move some of the points, and it shouldn't be too tricky. You kind of already know what a rectangle is. You've been doing that since grade school. Create a rectangle. Once you have that, again, it says to call the teacher over, but you don't have to. If it says rectangle but doesn't say rhombus, then you have it right. And we're looking for the 2 main properties of a rectangle. They're really simple. Number 1, the angles are 90 degrees. And number 2, you probably wouldn't notice, but the diagonals, if you look down here on the bottom on the left-hand side, the diagonals are equal to each other. So our 2 rules for a rectangle is that we have 90-degree angles, and all the angles are 90 degrees, and the diagonals are the same. They're congruent. So So if we go into our notes, you should be able to answer the two problems and questions here at number 5, the two main properties of a rectangle. Then go to the next page, and we have our rectangle problems. Now, the first problem should be pretty simple and instinctive. If you have to guess, you'll guess it right, probably. Tells you this side is 14. Well, that tells you what the opposite side is. If you know this is 14, you should be able to easily figure out B. And likewise with the 28 here, if you know this side is 28, you should easily be able to figure out side A. For problem number 2, it's about the diagonals. It tells you that this diagonal, RT, has a length of 10, and it's asking you what this diagonal, QS, is. Well, it should be pretty easy. We just wrote down that the rule is the diagonals are the same, so it should be pretty easy to find QS. On the bottom of this page, and we're on page 11 right now, problems 3 and 4. Good news is we get to cross off problem number 3. We're not going to have time for that right now, so maybe we'll come back to that later. Problem number 4 should be pretty simple here. We know that the angles in a rectangle are 90 degrees, so pretty easily you should be able to just tell me what x is. And for y, since we know that this angle must be equal to 90, we get a real simple equation, and you're going to have to take that equation and solve for y. Okay, finally we're on to a square. Once again, on page 12, you can use Google to come up with the definition for a square. You can probably write your own definition, maybe, if you really understand that a square is a type of rhombus and rectangle. But most of the work on this page is simply trying to decide how the square is related to a rectangle, rhombus, and parallelogram. So it says to go to the app, and I'm going to refresh it to start. And it says to try to make a square that's not any of these other things. So every time you try to make any kind of square, you're stuck making a rectangle and a rhombus. And that's because a square is a rhombus. You can't have a square that isn't a rhombus. You can't have a square that isn't a rectangle. You can't have a square that isn't a parallelogram. Should be pretty easy to answer questions 2 to 5 there. So the square, when you get down to problem number 7, the square also has to be, well, it also has to be these other shapes. So you can easily answer that one as well. Then on the bottom, it simply lists all the properties of a square. There's a whole bunch of them. And the question is, which other quadrilaterals have this? For example, 2 sets of parallel sides. A square has that. What other shapes have that? Well, that's a parallelogram. If it's a parallelogram, it's also a rectangle and a rhombus. So you would write parallelogram, rectangle, rhombus here. And that's all you have to do is identify which other shapes have these. Here it says the angles are 90. That it also happens in a rectangle. So you would write rectangle for that one. The last thing to do here is go to page 13 and deal with our square problems. For the square problems, all these problems just look like problems from a previous page. For example, here we're looking for this angle, but we know that a square is a type of rhombus, and then a rhombus, the diagonals make 90-degree angles. So you should be able to figure out what Z is. Problem number 2 on this page, well, we're talking about the angles, and it has the square has the same properties of angles as a rectangle. If you're not sure how to find x or y, look back at page 11, problem number 4. You did a problem just like it when it was a rectangle. You get down to the bottom, for right now, we're going to skip problem number 3, so you can cross that off. And then over here, problem number 4, this is back to being a property of a rhombus. If we know one side is 8, then we know the measures of all 3 sides if this is a square. The last problem, again, I'd like to come back to this, so don't cross it off. You can just circle it and skip it for now. Okay, so you should have the notes, pages 8 to 13 filled out. And then once you have all that done, you're going to go see the teacher. They should have a worksheet. It should be pretty simple. All the problems on there look mostly like these easy ones. There are a couple of harder ones all the way back for the parallelogram. So if you get stuck on the problems on the front side, look back at page 7. There is a problem on the assignment that's like page 7, problem number 5. If you have trouble with that, do the best you can. We'll go over this stuff when we come back.